Constantinople, the 1630s. A man in plain clothes is walking the night streets of the greatest city on earth, and there is a sword hidden under his coat. He is not a thief. He is the Sultan. Murad IV has outlawed coffee across the Ottoman Empire, and he has decided to enforce the ban with his own hands. He slips into the districts after dark, alone, listening at shuttered windows for the low murmur of men talking. When he finds someone bent over a small cup of something dark and steaming, the punishment, by some accounts, is carried out on the spot. The old chronicles claim tens of thousands died under his prohibitions on coffee and tobacco. Those numbers are almost certainly exaggerated. But strip the legend away, and a hard fact stays standing. A head of state was so frightened of a hot drink that he was willing to execute his own people over it. Here is the part that should stop you cold. That exact drink, the one an emperor thought was dangerous enough to kill for, is the one 2 out of every 3 American adults will pour into a mug tomorrow morning before they say a single word to another human being. We don't call it a drug, we call it a coffee break. This is the story of how the most widely used mind-altering substance on the planet went from a crime punishable by death to the one addiction America hands out for free in the break room, and what the people selling it to you right now would rather you never stop to think about. This is where it begins. The bean that grew wild. Before America existed. To find where this starts, you have to leave the empires behind and climb. Southwest Ethiopia, the highlands of a region called Kaffa, sitting somewhere between 4,500 and 7,200 feet above sea level, higher than the summit of anything in the Appalachian Mountains, wrapped in cool, wet cloud forest that stays green year-round. This is not a plantation. It never was. Here, the coffee plant grows the way it has for hundreds of thousands of years. Wild, in the shade of taller trees, scattered across the forest floor as a low, glossy-leafed shrub that almost no one on the other side of the world knew existed. Every single cup of Arabica coffee poured anywhere on earth today, every latte at Starbucks, every pot in a Waffle House, every K-cup in an office in Ohio, traces its genetics back to these forests. A genome study published in 2024 concluded the species arose here through a natural cross between 2 wild plants somewhere around 600,000 years ago. People were living alongside this plant, using it in the Ethiopian highlands centuries before there was a United States, centuries before there was an England anyone today would recognize. You know the legend. A goat herd named Kaldi notices his goats dancing, sleepless and wild-eyed, after nibbling the bright red cherries off a certain bush. He tries them himself, and the rest is history. Whether Kaldi was ever a real person is anyone's guess. The story doesn't show up in writing until the 1600s, long after the fact. What isn't up for debate is the plant. It's from here, Kaffa. The name itself may be the root of the word coffee, though linguists still argue about it. Picture the moment that mattered, though. Not the myth, the reality. A pair of hands, generations before any European tasted this. Someone in these forests reaches up and pulls a cherry off the branch. It's not a bean yet. It's a small, deep red fruit, about the size of a cranberry, with a thin skin that gives under your thumb. Bite it, and the pulp is faintly sweet, a little slick, clinging to 2 hard green seeds inside. Those seeds are bitter enough to make you spit. Nobody's roasting anything. Nobody's brewing anything. Instead, there's a technique the modern world forgot completely. In the highlands, people ground those coffee cherries together with animal fat and rolled them into dense little balls. A portable jolt of energy you could carry on a long walk or into a fight. No cup, no saucer. Just fat and fruit and the raw stimulant inside the seed, eaten by hand. That's the original form of the most traded drug in human history. A greasy energy ball in the mountains of Africa, thousands of years before it ever touched porcelain. For a very long time, that's where coffee stayed. Wild, local, and completely unknown to the empires, that would one day kill for it. The plant was sitting in the forest, loaded, waiting. It just needed someone to figure out what it could really do. That someone was praying. The wine of Islam and the secret of mocha crossed the Red Sea from Africa into Yemen and jumped forward to the 1400s. This is where coffee stops being a plant and becomes a habit. The people who cracked it were Sufi mystics, Islamic ascetics whose devotion ran on long, exhausting nights of prayer, chanting, and meditation. Staying awake and alert through those marathon sessions was the whole challenge. And somewhere in the monasteries of Yemen, they found their answer in the roasted seed of the Ethiopian shrub. Boil it, drink the dark liquid, and the fatigue lifts. The mind sharpens. The night opens up. They called it kahwa, an Arabic word that had originally meant wine. That's not a small detail. Alcohol was forbidden. Here was a drink that did the opposite of wine. Instead of dulling you, it lit you up, and it did it without breaking religious law. A stimulant you were allowed to have. In a culture that had closed the door on one drug, coffee walked straight through a different one. Sit with one of those nights for a second. A stone room, oil lamps, a circle of men on the floor. A clay pot passes hand to hand in the dark. The coffee is nothing like yours. Unfiltered, gritty, bitter, probably closer to boiled mud than anything you'd order. But as it goes around the circle, spines straighten. Voices hold. The drowsiness that used to end the prayer just doesn't come. For the first time, human beings had a reliable, repeatable chemical switch for wakefulness. They'd found the on button. And here's the breakthrough that turned a ritual into an empire. The roasting. Roasting and brewing the seed made it something you could standardize, prepare, sell, and serve the same way every time. Yemen didn't just drink coffee. Yemen commercialized it. By the 15th century, Yemeni traders were roasting and shipping it across the Arabian Peninsula, and it all funneled through one port on the Red Sea, a city called Al-Makka. You know it by its European name, mocha. That word still hangs on the side of coffee drinks in every American strip mall 500 years later. And almost nobody who orders one knows they're saying the name of a Yemeni harbor. Yemen understood exactly what it was holding. For decades, its rulers guarded coffee like a state secret. You could buy the roasted bean, but the beans were boiled or parched first, so they couldn't be planted. Fertile seeds and living plants were forbidden from leaving the country. Yemen had a global monopoly on the world's most exciting new drink, and it intended to keep it the way a modern company guards a patent. The drink spread anyway, north and east, city by city, Mecca, Cairo, Damascus, and eventually Istanbul. And everywhere it landed, it did something new and slightly dangerous. It created a place, a public room where men gathered not to worship, not to shop, but simply to drink coffee and talk. The coffeehouse. That room terrified the people in charge almost immediately. In 1511, the governor of Mecca, a market inspector named Kaya Beg, looked at the crowds gathering in these coffee circles, decided they were breeding trouble and loose talk, and banned the drink outright. It was the first coffee ban in recorded history. It would not be the last. And like every single one that followed, it failed. The higher authorities in Cairo overturned it. The coffee kept flowing. But a monopoly that valuable is a target, and the plant Yemen was guarding so carefully was about to be smuggled out. A theft that would put coffee into the hands of Europe's empires and turn a Sufi prayer aid into the engine of the modern world. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel covers the hidden histories behind the things that shape the world. Real stories, real numbers, no filler. New video every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas, New York, or somewhere in between, I always want to know. Now, let's talk about the room where the modern world got invented. The room where the modern world was built. Coffee's first great empire wasn't built on a plantation. It was built on a piece of furniture. A table, with strangers around it, arguing. When coffee reached the Ottoman capital, the kahvehane, the coffeehouse, exploded across Constantinople in the mid-1500s. People called them schools of the wise, because for the price of a cup you could sit for hours and soak up news, poetry, gossip, chess, and politics. That was the radical part, not the caffeine, the access, a public place open to almost anyone, where ideas moved freely and rank mattered less than it did outside the door. That idea crossed into Europe in the 1600s and hit like a struck match. The first English coffeehouse opened in Oxford around 1650. London's first opened in 1652. Within a couple of decades there were hundreds, then by some counts thousands, packed into the city. They earned a nickname that tells you everything: penny universities. For 1 penny, the price of a single cup of coffee, you could walk in, sit down, and access the smartest conversation in the city. No tuition, no title required. Isaac Newton went to coffee houses. So did the diarist Samuel Pepys. At the Grecian coffee house, members of the Royal Society argued science so intensely that Newton once, according to the stories, dissected a dolphin right there on the table. Now here's the thing about coffee that the tea drinkers never quite got. Coffee replaced the drink Europe used to run on all day: beer. For centuries, people drank weak ale from morning on, partly because it was safer than the water. It kept the entire working population in a mild, all-day haze. Coffee flipped that switch. It was the first drink that made you sharper as the day went on instead of foggier. A whole civilization, for the first time, was sobering up during working hours and buzzing on a stimulant instead. And it turned out that when you fill a room with wide-awake, argumentative, sober people and let them stay for hours, they build things. Look at what came out of those specific rooms. Edward Lloyd's coffee house, down by the London docks, filled up with ship captains and merchants trading news about which vessels made it and which ones sank. That gossip became a business, and that business became Lloyd's of London, still one of the most important insurance markets on the planet. A few streets over, Jonathan's coffee house filled with men buying and selling shares in companies, and that scrum of deal-making became the London Stock Exchange. Insurance, the stock market, the modern press, the Enlightenment itself, all of it incubated over cups of coffee in rooms that existed because of a drug from an Ethiopian forest. The people in power noticed, and they hated it. In 1675, King Charles II issued a proclamation ordering every coffee house in England shut down, calling them places where the disaffected gathered to spread scandalous reports about his government. He was right. That's exactly what they were. And here's how much power coffee already had. The public backlash was so ferocious that the king caved and withdrew the ban in about 11 days. A monarch tried to close the coffee houses and lost in under 2 weeks. Now bring it home, because this is the part most Americans never connect. That same coffeehouse machine crossed the Atlantic and built the center of American finance. In the spring of 1792, 24 stockbrokers in New York signed an agreement to trade with one another under a buttonwood tree on a street called Wall Street. They needed a roof to do business under, so they set up shop inside a coffeehouse, the Tontine Coffee House at 82 Wall Street. That coffeehouse became the first home of what is now the New York Stock Exchange, the largest stock market in the world. The next time you hear about the Dow or the S&P on the evening news, understand that the whole apparatus started in a room that sold coffee, because coffee was what kept the traders sharp enough to trade. An empire built on a beam, a financial system built in a break room. But every cup in every one of those coffee houses had to be filled, and Europe couldn't grow a single bean of it. The climate was wrong, so the empires went looking for places that were right, and they built something to fill the cups. They built it out of people. The hands that never tasted the cup. Here's the ugly arithmetic behind your morning routine. Coffee only grows in a warm belt near the equator. The empires that got addicted to it, the British, the French, the Dutch, and eventually the Americans, lived nowhere near that belt. So to feed the habit, they had to grow it somewhere hot, cheaply, at massive scale. And cheaply, at massive scale, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries meant one thing. First, the plant had to be stolen from Yemen. The legends are almost too good. An Indian pilgrim named Baba Budan supposedly smuggling 7 fertile seeds strapped against his chest out of Mecca. A French naval officer named Gabriel de Clieu nursing a single seedling across the Atlantic, sharing his own water ration with it during a becalmed, dying voyage to plant it in the Caribbean. How much of that is true and how much is folklore, nobody can say for sure. But the outcome is certain. The monopoly broke. Live coffee plants reached European colonies, and the plantations began. And no country in the Americas took to it like Brazil. Coffee reached Brazil in 1727. The story goes that a Portuguese officer named Francisco de Melo Paleta charmed the wife of a neighboring colony's governor, who slipped him fertile seeds hidden in a bouquet of flowers. Legend or not, the plant took root, and Brazil became a coffee machine unlike anything the world had seen. By 1850, Brazil alone was producing more than half the coffee on Earth. It has held the #1 spot for over a century and a half. Today, it still grows roughly a third of the world's supply. That empire was built on the largest system of human bondage in the Western Hemisphere. Brazil imported more enslaved Africans than any country in the history of the Americas. Of the roughly 12.5 million people forced across the Atlantic in chains, an estimated 45% were taken to Brazil. And here's the detail that ties the chain directly to the cup. The coffee boom didn't slow the slave trade down. It sped it up. Even after Brazil officially banned the importation of enslaved people in 1831, the traffic kept climbing to feed the coffee fields. Around 26,000 people in 1825, 43,000 in 1828, roughly 60,000 a year by the late 1840s. The demand for coffee in the drawing rooms of Europe and the parlors of America was a pump, and the pump ran on human beings. Stand in one of those fields for a moment. A fazenda in the Paraíba Valley, southeast Brazil, at first light. The rows of coffee trees run up a hillside so steep you have to climb to work them. An enslaved man moves down a row, stripping the ripe cherries off the branches by hand, one after another, into a basket he'll have to haul on his back when it's full. The sun is already brutal. The quota is enormous, and falling short means the whip. There is no cup of coffee at the end of this for him. The coffee is the product, and he is the machinery, and the two are not allowed to meet. Life expectancy for an enslaved worker on these plantations was devastatingly short. When one body was used up, the ledger simply bought another. It wasn't only Brazil. Half a world of coffee ran on the same fuel. On the French island of Saint-Domingue, which we now call Haiti, enslaved workers grew a huge share of the coffee Europe drank right up until the night of August 14th, 1791, when they rose up, burned hundreds of plantations to the ground, and launched the only successful large-scale slave revolt in history. The coffee in the cups of Paris and Boston had been picked by people who were not free, and for a moment, the fields themselves caught fire. And America was the destination. As the young United States grew, it became one of the largest coffee-drinking nations on Earth, and the beans came up from Latin America, much of it, for generations, grown and picked by enslaved and coerced people to the south. American ports, American merchants, American breakfast tables were the end of that chain. The comfortable morning ritual was real. So was the cost. They just happened on different continents, and we only ever saw one of them. Quick question, and I actually want your answer in the comments. How many cups of coffee do you think Americans drink in a single day? As a country. Not per year. Per day. Take a guess, lock it in, and hold on to it. I'll give you the real number before we're done, and it's going to sound made up. Now, don't get angry yet. Hold it. Because the part that should really get you isn't 300 years ago in a Brazilian field. It's happening right now, on a shelf you'll walk past this week. How coffee became American America almost wasn't a coffee country. For most of the colonial era, the colonists drank tea, same as their British cousins. Coffee was around, and in a lot of places it was actually cheaper and easier to get. But tea was the ritual, the respectable drink of an English people. Then, On a December night in 1773, colonists in Boston dumped 342 chests of British tea into the harbour, and coffee stopped being just a drink. It became a loyalty test. To keep sipping tea was to side with the crown. To switch to coffee was to plant your flag as an American. Even a future president caught the fever. In a 1774 letter to his wife Abigail, John Adams described stopping at an inn, asking for tea, provided it was honestly smuggled, being told the house had renounced tea entirely and settling for coffee instead. Tea, he wrote, must be universally renounced. He'd have to be weaned off it, and the sooner the better. Now, the honest historian's footnote, the overnight switch is partly a myth. Researchers who've dug through colonial-era advertisements point out that coffee was already more available and cheaper than tea before the Tea Party ever happened. A big reason it won was simply the price per pound. The revolution didn't invent American coffee drinking, it gave it a flag to march under. But march it did, and it never stopped. By the time soldiers were fighting the Civil War, coffee was so essential to army morale that it was written into the rations, and troops brewed it over campfires between battles. A cup of joe became shorthand for American grit. In both world wars, coffee went overseas with the troops as a piece of home. Then, American business did something quietly brilliant. It turned the drug into a scheduled part of the workday. The coffee break wasn't some ancient tradition. The phrase was pushed hard into the culture by a coffee industry marketing campaign in the early 1950s, selling employers on the idea that a caffeinated worker was a productive worker. Think about the sleight of hand there. An industry convinced American companies to build a stimulant dose directly into the structure of the 8-hour day and to feel good about it. The percolator bubbled on every suburban counter. The bottomless cup became the birthright of every trucker and waitress and night shift nurse in the country. Folgers and Maxwell House became household names, promising a rich, dependable jolt in a can. Maxwell House even borrowed the slogan, "Good to the last drop." And then, in 1971, in Seattle, a store opened that would change the ritual one more time. Starbucks. It took the plain American cup of coffee and turned it into a $4 identity. A latte. A name on a cup, a lifestyle you could carry down the sidewalk. Coffee went from a necessity to an accessory. Today, Starbucks and Dunkin' anchor practically every commercial strip in the country, and Americans hand over their coffee money without blinking, every single day, out of habit that runs bone deep. For a while, that looked like the whole story, a happy ending. America had taken the world's drug and domesticated it into something wholesome. Dad's morning pot, the office break room, the friendly barista. The worst of it, the executions and the plantations, seemed safely buried in the past. But the drug never went anywhere. And in the last few decades, a new set of companies figured out how to sell it to you harder, more concentrated, and less watched than at any point since Murad IV was patrolling Constantinople with a sword. What I haven't told you yet is what the people selling America its caffeine right now already know, and what one federal agency decided a long time ago not to look at too closely. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the story you were told. Do me one favor, hit subscribe. It's the single thing that helps these deep dives reach more people. Okay, back to it, because this next part is where it stops being history and starts being about you. The decision. Nobody voted on. Let's be clear about what caffeine actually is, because we've spent 500 years agreeing not to say it out loud. Caffeine is a drug. Specifically, it's the most widely used psychoactive drug in the world, a central nervous system stimulant that more than 80% of American adults take every single day. Scientists don't hedge on that. The debate isn't whether it's a drug. The debate is only whether we're willing to call it one. Here's how it works. In plain terms, your brain runs on a molecule called adenosine that builds up while you're awake and slowly tells you to get tired. Caffeine is shaped just enough like adenosine to slip into the same docking sites and block them, so the "you're getting tired" signal never lands. That's the lift. But your brain adapts. Take caffeine every day and it grows more docking sites to compensate. which is why the same cup does less over time, and why the morning you skip it, all that unblocked adenosine comes flooding in at once. That's the headache, the fog, the misery. That's withdrawal. And caffeine withdrawal is a real enough medical condition that it's listed by name in the DSM-5, the same diagnostic manual American psychiatrists use for every other disorder. Physical dependence on a daily dose in ordinary people drinking a normal amount. That's not abuse, that's just Tuesday. Now, is caffeine dangerous the way the villains in our other stories are dangerous? For most adults, in coffee, no. The science is genuinely reassuring. And the FDA calls up to about 400 milligrams a day, roughly 4 or 5 cups, generally safe. This isn't a story about your morning pot poisoning you. This is a story about what happens when an industry takes that reassurance, strips the caffeine out of the coffee, concentrates it, and sells it in forms the safety data was never about. To people the safety data was never about, through a regulatory gap you could drive a truck through. And that gap was a decision. In 1994, Congress passed a law called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. In plain English, it decided that a whole category of products, dietary supplements, didn't need the FDA's approval before going on sale. No proving they were safe first. No proving the dose. The government would only step in after something went wrong, once the product was already on the shelf and in the bloodstream. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. Because here's the loophole it opened. When it comes to caffeine, the FDA set exactly one hard limit, and it set it decades ago for exactly one product: cola-type soft drinks, capped at about 71 milligrams in a 12-ounce can. That's it. That safe harbor was written for a bottle of Coke in a mid-century world where soda was where added caffeine lived. It was never redrawn. And so when energy drinks and caffeine powders came along, products that didn't exist when the line was drawn, they simply stepped around it. Market your caffeinated product as a dietary supplement, or even as a conventional food that isn't a cola, and there is no federal cap on how much caffeine you can put in it. Unlike Canada, unlike Mexico, the United States sets no maximum. The company decides the company's product is safe, and then it sells it. It gets worse, and this is the part that should make you angry. In most cases, they don't even have to tell you how much caffeine is in the can. A soda has a limit, but the drink marketed to your teenager doesn't. And when caffeine is buried inside a proprietary energy blend on the label, the company only has to list the total weight of the whole blend. You could be looking at a supplement facts panel that says, energy blend, 1,500 milligrams, and have no way on earth to know whether the caffeine in it is 100 milligrams or 800. You, the customer, are not allowed to know the dose of the drug you're drinking. Say that back to yourself. The single most used drug in the country. No cap on the concentration. No requirement, in most cases, to disclose the amount. A safe harbor written for a cola bottle and never touched again, while the whole product world mutated around it. The FDA didn't get tricked. Congress didn't get tricked. They drew a line for one kind of drink in one era and simply chose, again and again, not to redraw it as the danger changed shape. This wasn't a foreign problem sneaking in. This happened in Washington, in the plain light of day, with everyone's signature on file, and the bodies showed up right on schedule. What it costs and who paid. Meet the products that walked through the gap. Energy drinks, Red Bull, Monster, and the rest. And later, straight caffeine powder, sold by the bag online. Marketed, over and over, to exactly the people least able to handle a heavy dose. Teenagers and young men, wrapped in the language of sports, gaming, and staying up all night. In December 2011, a 14-year-old named Anais Fournier from Hagerstown, Maryland, drank 2 24-ounce Monster energy drinks over about 24 hours. Together, roughly 480 milligrams of caffeine, about what you'd get from 14 cans of Coke, slammed into a teenage body in a day. She went into cardiac arrest and died. The medical examiner listed the cause as cardiac arrhythmia due to caffeine toxicity. Now, I'm going to be straight with you, because this story deserves honesty and not a cheap villain. Anais had a pre-existing heart condition. Monster fought the lawsuit hard, hired its own panel of doctors, and argued the caffeine played no role in her death. And the FDA itself said the reports it was reviewing did not prove the drinks caused any deaths. That's the truth, and it cuts both ways. But here's what isn't in dispute. When the FDA looked into it, the agency had already logged multiple reports of deaths and dozens of adverse event reports mentioning that one brand. Reports, not proof. And that's the quiet scandal underneath the loud one. We built a system that carefully collects the bodies into a database and is structured so it almost never has to act on them. Then there's the case with no ambiguity at all. In May 2014, an 18-year-old wrestler named Logan Steiner, an honor student days away from graduating high school in LaGrange, Ohio, collapsed and died on his living room floor. The coroner first thought natural causes. Then Logan's family found a small bag of powder. It was pure caffeine. His friend had bought it on Amazon. The autopsy found a lethal amount in his blood. By the coroner's estimate, more than 20 times the level in a typical coffee drinker. Understand what that powder is, in the FDA's own words. A single teaspoon of pure caffeine powder is the equivalent of drinking about 25 to 28 cups of coffee at once. A 1/16 of a teaspoon, a dusting you cannot accurately measure with any spoon in your kitchen, is already 2 strong coffees worth. The gap between a dose that wakes you up and a dose that stops your heart is invisible to the naked eye. And it was sold legally as a dietary supplement, shipped to a teenager's house in a bag, because the 1994 loophole meant nobody had to prove it was safe before it went on sale. The same year, a 24-year-old man in Alpharetta, Georgia, named Wade Sweat, died the same way. Only after those deaths did the machinery grind into motion. The FDA issued warnings and sent letters to 5 companies selling bulk powdered caffeine. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio pushed the agency to ban the retail powder outright. Consumer advocates petitioned. Reforms came. After the funerals. That's the pattern this whole system was designed around. Act once the price has already been paid, in a kid from Ohio, in a girl from Maryland, in a young man from Georgia. Now, I went looking for the thing our other stories usually have, the internal memo, the boardroom calculation in dollars, the executive who ran the math on lives versus lawsuits and picked the lawsuits. For caffeine, that single smoking gun document isn't there, and I'm not going to invent one. But the real arithmetic is almost worse, because it's not a conspiracy. It's just an incentive left standing in the open. Selling concentrated caffeine to young people is a multi-billion-dollar business. Fixing the gap, setting a cap, requiring the dose on the label, would cost the government almost nothing, and the industry a little bit of margin. For 30 years, we've chosen the margin. The industry's own trade group will tell you accurately that supplements are still subject to FDA oversight and that the loophole is overstated. And yet, no cap, no mandatory dose on most labels. A teaspoon that equals 28 coffees, sold in a bag. Those 3 facts don't need a memo. They are the memo. The regulators knew what caffeine was. They've known for decades, and the product kept getting stronger and less labeled and more aimed at kids, while Americans paid the price one obituary at a time. It's on your nightstand right now. So step back and look at where this 600,000-year-old drug actually lives today. In America. In your life. This week. About 66% of American adults drink coffee every single day, the highest rate in 20 years, and up more than a third since 2004. More than 80% of adults across North America take caffeine daily in one form or another, which makes it, by a wide margin, the most used drug in the country. Not alcohol, not nicotine. Caffeine. The average American walks around on somewhere between about 135 and 280 milligrams of it a day, every day, topped up on a schedule, managing a dependence most of us have never once thought to question. We drink roughly 9 to 10 pounds of coffee per person per year. The country as a whole runs on tens of billions of dollars of it annually. And that's before you count the energy drinks and the powders and the caffeine now slipped into gum, mints, and bottled water. Remember the question I asked you back in the coffee fields? How many cups Americans drink in a single day as a country? Here's the number. It's somewhere around 400 to 500 million cups a day. That's more than 1 cup for every man, woman, and child in the United States, every 24 hours. Poured and gone and poured again tomorrow. If you guessed anywhere close, you were paying attention. Most people guess low by a factor of 10 because we simply do not see it as a drug we're all taking. We see it as Tuesday, and it is everywhere you are going to be. It's the pot on your kitchen counter and the K-cup in the office. It's the Starbucks and the Dunkin' on the corner. It's the Monster and the Red Bull in the glass case at every gas station and every 7-Eleven. Right at a teenager's eye level. It's the pre-workout in the tub at the supplement store and the powder one click away on Amazon. It's on the shelf at Costco in a jar the size of a car battery. There is almost nowhere in American daily life you can stand and not be within arm's reach of the most used drug on earth. And unlike Murad's Constantinople, nobody's hiding it because nobody thinks it needs hiding. Slow down here, because this is the whole thing. We tell ourselves a story about who we are: a free country, fair markets, informed consumers who get to make their own choices with the facts in front of them. And then there's the drug we actually built our countries every working day around. A stimulant an emperor once killed for, grown for centuries by people in chains, refined into the fuel of the stock exchange and the 8-hour shift, sold to our kids in a can that doesn't have to tell them the dose. We didn't decide any of that in the open. It was decided for us, in coffee houses and boardrooms and one committee room in 1994, and then handed to us as a habit so normal we mistake it for a personality trait. How many things in your life right now, the things you'd swear are just your own free choices, were actually settled a long time ago by someone in a room you never got to stand in? Sit with that one. I'm not going to answer it for you. Here's what I'll ask instead. Have you ever tried to quit caffeine? Actually gone a few days without it? And felt exactly how much it had a hold on you? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I already know some of you are reading this with a cup in your hand, feeling a little bit called out. Good. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the real history behind the things that run your life, subscribe. Hit the like button. It's a small thing that tells me you want to keep going deeper. And share this with someone who thinks they already know how the world works. Ideally, someone who can't function without their coffee. They're going to want to argue with you about it. Let them. Tomorrow morning, before you're really awake, you'll reach for it on autopilot. The mug, the drive-through, the can in the cooler. And for about 4 seconds, you'll remember that the thing in your hand is the same drug an emperor executed people to stop. The same drug that men were worked to death to grow. The same drug we quietly agreed to stop calling a drug. Then the caffeine will hit, the thought will dissolve, and you'll go on with your day. That's how it's always worked. That's the whole trick. And now you can't unsee it.